Welcome to the ESG Network Early Career Researchers Podcast. I'm Thais Ribeiro, one of the coordinators of the ECR committee. In this series of short podcasts, we ask senior scholars what life was like for them in their early careers and what meaningful lessons they can share. Today, our guest is Professor Ana Flávia Barros, Associate Professor at the International Relations Institute from the University of Brasília, a senior researcher at the Earth System Governance Project, and director of the Brasília Research Center. In her career, she has been very successful in building bridges between academia and other important actors in society. Welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining us. So, Professor Ana Barros, our first question is, what advice do you have for early career researchers to establish fruitful collaborations and networking opportunities within academia?
Hello, Thais. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great honor and happiness to be here with you today. I would start saying that the first thing is to get out of the university campus. Try to work on projects that are important for you, like NGOs, or in the case of Brasília, civil servant structures, or research centers, think tanks. And to start this collaboration is never an easy task. You have to meet people. And I think that's the key issue to be tackled. How do you meet different people? So in the case of Brazil, it's kind of structured. You can try an internship in different institutions, or you can go to the market and try law firms, NGOs, and other institutions that can be interesting for you. In the case of University of Brasília, most of my students start internship very early. They are in the middle of their undergraduate courses and they are already looking for internships. So I would say just get out of the campus.
And it brings us to our next question. How to build bridges between the academia and the many different stakeholders involved in Earth system governance, like government, civil society, among others. So we can start in our undergrad with internships, but what else can we do?
In the case of graduate students, professors, voluntary professors, associate researchers, in the case of Brasília and in the case of Brazil in general, one very important thing to do is to meet with different people. I would say try getting in touch, taking some time to ask for interviews or even informal talks. In Brazil, we always invite them for a coffee, and also in France. So it's an informal talk. It's the first time you're meeting with someone who is working with the subject that's the subject of your research project, and start collaborating in a very informal way so that they don't be afraid of you and they don't run away from you, because it always happens when you try to talk to people who are really busy. They don't have the time to talk to researchers unless you have very interesting questions. And then you can try to be provocative. For example, discussing foreign policy, discussing, in the case of Brazil, again, what President Lula said during the G7 summit in Hiroshima now. And then this is very provocative. So diplomats or senior civil servants will be interested in meeting with you and exchanging views. So you have to create a win-win situation where the person you want to meet believes that he or she will learn something from you too. It's an exchange. It's not just, well, one more researcher taking my time and I'm so busy and I don't have time and I don't feel like answering the same questions because the person is not prepared. So I would say prepare your first meeting, go for it, try to meet different people, ask interesting questions, and then once you've met with someone that's really interesting, then this will open doors for you to meet other people who work with the same subject. And it's really interesting how it works. The first approach, I think it's the most important thing that you have to care about. So presenting yourself or having yourself introduced by someone who already knows the person sometimes makes the total difference. So senior professors can help young researchers meet with senior diplomats, senior policymakers, Congress men and women who will open those doors for you.
That's great advice. And now to your career. What was the biggest challenge you faced?
Well, I have to start saying that I'm Brazilian and I went to Paris when I was 21 years old to continue my master degree there. And the biggest challenge was to learn French and to get adapted to the French system, which was totally different from what we had in Brazil at that time. And I had to work much harder than the others because I didn't speak any French when I was in Paris, when I arrived in Paris. So the biggest challenge was to get accepted, let's say, by the professors and my fellow students. It was very hard. And to understand why I was so different. I didn't agree with most things they were saying most of the time. For example, their biggest challenge in international relations was Germany, the rise of Germany, and how Germany could be a game changer for the European Union building process. And to my mind, that was not important at all because my heritage, political heritage, was much more focused on the integration of South America. In short, how to make Mercosur function effectively. So I think the challenges are always very important, and because they make you work harder. And the second challenge in my career after staying in the Paris One University, Sorbonne Panthéon, for almost 9 years, from my licence up to the PhD degree, doctorat, was how to build a career when it was very difficult to meet with people outside the university. So I had very small jobs and consulting projects to work with. I didn't make any money. And then to meet people from the international organizations like UNESCO, it was very difficult. The university didn't help at all. Those bridges were not there. And only students from Sciences Po in Paris had a very big support from the institution, because they in Sciences Po, they have a kind of meeting day when the companies come to the university's main building and they meet with the students. So there's a matchmaking process. And Sorbonne Panthéon did not have, and I don't think they have something comparable now. So my advice for the university workers is to make this matchmaking, because when the students build those bridges alone, it's very difficult. And the institutional work is key to link what they're learning in the university and what real life demands from them when they have this degree. So, and then the second biggest challenge was finding a job. When I had my PhD degree in Paris 22 years ago, there was no job for young researchers, young doctors. So most of my colleagues went working with different areas, and I decided to come back to Brazil. And I was very fortunate. There was a selection process a few months later, and I was the one selected for that post. So I was very lucky. But I understand many of my colleagues, people of my age who graduated with me, they struggled a lot to have a position in academia.
And this is a challenge we still face today, right?
Exactly.
And now you got in the university as an associate professor and have been building your career. So what makes your work meaningful to you today?
My students. When I see my former students, the young men and women I met working in anywhere in the world, many of them are in Asia, in Europe, the United States. I'm very proud of them, and I think sometimes they write to me and they say they're happy. So that's what makes my work meaningful as a professor, as a researcher. And also when I can collaborate with Brazilian authorities or sometimes United Nations debates on how to make sustainability governance work, or what are our opinions about any negotiations that are underway. Now, for example, I'm working with Brazilian authorities on everything concerning the ocean, and that goes from the South Atlantic to Antarctica and to the Arctic as polar diplomacy agenda. And I think it's very meaningful because Brazil has been lagging behind for many years. And we have very good scientists here from the earth science, life sciences, but social sciences and humanities, we do not appear on the radar yet. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And this is one of my goals now, encouraging young researchers to work with subjects that are very important for the planetary boundaries, like the ocean, and making them aware, or helping them to get some awareness about how this is key to the future we want.
And our final question is, in this context that you shared, what do you think are the most critical skills that early career researchers should cultivate?
Wow, I would say creativity and the skill of connecting the dots with the world in general and the demise of the liberal international order, great power competition, the empowerment of the private sector, the threats to democracy. There's so many things going on at the same time. And considering the global scale, the systematic approach, the system approach, too many things going on in a very accelerated manner. And the most skilled students or young professionals, in my opinion, are those who can connect the dots. For example, what does the war the Russian war in Ukraine mean to the demise of multilateralism, to the crisis of food and energy security we are starting to face, and stuff like that. Too many things happening at the same time. And first of all, the skilled young generation needs to understand how all those events or tipping points are somehow connected to what they are working with. And I think this also helps them to understand from their analytical skills perspective, to understand the place and the role that their own country can play. For example, in Brazil, we read a lot of people saying Brazil is a game changer, Brazil is a global player, Brazil is this and that. And I think this should be discussed in depth. It's not so easy, not so fast. So I would say the skills would be more in this critical and analytical realm. Young people need to, first of all, be very open-minded, read different newspapers from different countries, be connected to the most relevant information. That's not always the most recent information. They need to separate the reliable sources from the rest. And most important, trying to connect in the sense of asking questions. What are the impacts of this meeting or this summit or this political approach to a specific agenda, and how the student or the young researcher can work with this complexity in international relations. When we think about complexity thinking in international relations, I think it's very challenging because the first thing we understand is we don't know much, and it's very difficult to connect all the points. And then, the system is very difficult to understand, but how can you navigate? How can you stop the political space from shrinking so fast? And how can you build your own GPS to navigate and avoid the sea monsters? And I think that so this analytical approach is what's missing in the young generation, because I understand it's very difficult because of the amount of the information that we have now. But and we have to admit that uncertainty or the unknowable is part of our research agenda now. But given we can choose a perspective and try to explain or apprehend, I think apprehend is better, what's going on, and understand the limits of our convictions and our results. So I would say to young people, just keep navigating, and remember you need a GPS, and you can have your own GPS. And you will meet so many different people now with different perspectives and different certainties, and that's the richness of the thing, that's the beautiness of international relations. You'll never get bored. You'll get lost, but you'll never get bored.
That's true. So thank you a lot for your time, for this great advice, and for paving the way somehow for us. And I hope everybody enjoyed this time together, and see you on our next podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Thais. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, and count on me if ever I can be of any help. Nice to talk to you. Bye-bye.